biggest annual expense is our scholarship program. And I just wanted to mention, something happened this last time that's never happened before. All three of the recipients are A&P students here at UAA. Traditionally, we've had a lot of pilots apply, but this year, our winners were Ryan Lee, who was born and raised in Anchorage, did a trip in the Marine Corps, and is now working on his A&P certificate. He'll be graduating in May of 2026. He's a private pilot, and he's taking lessons to obtain his commercial flight certificate. The second winner, Zachary Roteman. Zach was born and raised in Kotzebue and currently lives in Palmer. He's enrolled in the A&P program. He also has his private certificate, and he works as a ground crew member at Lake Clark Air. And then lastly, Whitney Kaufman. Whitley is from Wasilla and is enrolled in the program since August of 2023. She's currently working at JBER as an aeronautics sustainment intern and with Lockheed Martin. Okay. Now, we got a really nice note here over the summer from one of our previous recipients, and I'd like to read it to you. This is from a gal named Lucy Hankins, and she wrote, "I was a 2022 scholarship recipient, and I'm writing to say thank you for supporting my dream to be a professional pilot. This scholarship helped me pursue my instrument rating. I'm excited to share that on May 1st, 2025, I'm graduating with a Bachelor of Science in Aviation Technology. I've been working as a CFI for Utah State since January, but I'm excited to share that I'm moving home to Seward. I started an LLC called Summit Flight Training and will be conducting training out of Seward. Anyway, thank you so much for supporting my education. I wouldn't be where I am without scholarships like yours." So I checked up. I went, "Oh, really? You're going to start a..." She did. I checked. She's got a website up there, and she's already got some testimonies from some of her students. So that's the biggest expense we have, and we appreciate your membership, your participation, and any donations that you can make. Okay. Today's event's a little bit different than we've done in the past. Typically, we have guest speakers that cover single topics like ski operations or seaplane operations or survival, etc. Today, we're doing something different. We're going to look at a number of accidents that vary from multiple fatalities to minor injuries. None of them occurred in Alaska, but they're representative of accidents that occur everywhere. They could have been here in Alaska. Every one of them, the NTSB final report's out. There's really no issue about what happened. In most cases, there is either a living person to tell us exactly what happened, or there is a witness, and or really good ATSB data that shows the flight track right down to the ground. So we're not going to pick at the reports or the pilots. That's not our objective. Our objective is to look at what kind of circumstances would, bring you to that. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel members. First, Darlene Rudisell. Darlene began flying in 1976 with her grandfather in a 1946 Luscombe. She earned her private pilot's license a year later and currently has an ATP, CFII, MEI. She's also a designated pilot examiner. She began flight instructing in 1980 and moved to Alaska in 2007, where she's currently part owner of a flight school based in Sterling, Soldotna, specialized in teaching float and tailwheel. She has over 21,000 hours, 15,000 as an instructor, and she focuses on teaching mountain flying and landing on mountain lakes in the Chugach and the Kenai. Darlene was voted the FAA CFI of the Year in 1996. Anyone that knows Darlene knows that she has a passion for teaching. And I gotta say, anybody that taught for 15,000 hours, at least 1,000 of them had to be shared terrors. I'm sure she's got a lot to add to this group, and I'll be calling her. Ed Cornfield began his flying career in International Falls, Minnesota, in a Norseman and a Beaver on floats, mostly flying in and out of Canada. He has an ATP, a CFII, and a glider instructor. He's been Alaskan since 1978. Ed has flown commercially in Kotzebue, Anchorage, and Bettles. He has over 15,000 hours in the state and flies part-time for Russ Flying Service. He's also an A&P with inspector authorization. A pilot since 1992, Scott Rocky began his flying career for Kenmore Air in Washington State. In 1999, he moved to Alaska and worked for Ketchum. Then in 2002, he went to his present job as a full-time pilot and mechanic for Russ Flying Service. At Rust, he's a check airman and flies everything from the Cessna 206 to a Turbine Otter on wheel skis and floats. Scott has an ATP and an A&P and has accumulated over 15,000 hours, mostly in Alaska. Mark Fitch, I asked to come because he's a relatively new CFI, 4 or 5 years now? Anyway, I think it's important to have a lot of us, you look around the audience, like we got a lot of gray hair, right? Some of us can't even remember what our first solo was, or when it took to get there, we've been flying. So anyway, Mark is a mathematics professor, but after he got his CFI several years back, he started instructing here at UAA as part of his duties with the university. Myself, I'm a 74 graduate of the Air Force Academy. I first soloed in 1973. I earned my Air Force pilot wings in 1976, and the Air Force brought me to Alaska in 1996, where I've been ever since, except for 15 months I spent out in Hawaii. I hold an ATP, a CFI II, and commercial cell certificates. I have about 5,000 hours total, including 2,300 fighter hours in the A7 and the F-16, and 900 hours as a forward air controller in the OV-10 and the O-2. A total of about 1,500 instructional hours, but 1,000 of them are military instructional hours, and about 550 or 600 civilian world. After I retired from the Air Force, I worked in the Regional Runway Safety Office here in Alaska, and then 10 years as the director here of the aviation programs. So that is your expert panel. And now, let's get to it. So let's bring up the one that says canyon flying. Okay. Got too many devices here. That works, okay. So the first one we're going to look at was an accident that occurred in the Gunnison River Canyon in Colorado. The pilot was a 21-year-old commercial pilot with an instrument rating. She had 300 total hours, but only 2 in the accident airplane. She got checked out in that airplane that morning. Then loaded up with family and friends and went flying. So it was a very, very short report. Fortunately, she survived. Let's see. Give you an idea what the terrain was like. That's the river canyon. That's her approximate impact location. And this is kind of what it looks like from in the canyon. So you get an idea of the lay of the land. This is a picture of the debris field. It's not much. The plane spun in, or stalled, and went in pretty flat, but burned to a cinder. Everybody survived. 4 serious injuries, 3 of them were burns. The worst burns were with the pilot. Okay. This is such a short report because they were able to talk to her. I'll just read the whole thing. The pilot reported she'd been checked out in the accident airplane that morning, and this was only her 2nd flight in the same type. So she was in a 182, but most of her flying, she had a variety of other airplanes, but most of it was 172 time. She stated she and 3 passengers were sightseeing in a canyon that began to narrow. As the flight progressed, she was unable to climb out of the canyon and stalled the airplane. During the stall recovery, the airplane impacted the trees and terrain. Post-crash fire ensued, and the airplane was destroyed. The NTSB basically said, pilot's improper decision to fly into an area of unsuitable terrain, which the airplane was unable to exit, resulting in an aerodynamic stall and subsequent impact. Cool. So here's some things that I'd like to talk about. And the way this is going to work is I'm probably going to throw some questions, or I'm hoping get some volunteer discussion. But after we kick these things around, if anybody out there has any questions, got a young man, Luke, back here. He's got a remote mic. He can bring it to you. Yeah.
Was she flying up canyon or down canyon? Did it say in the report?
She was flying west to east. That's all I can tell you. It appears to me, and if you look at the whole thing on Google Earth, she probably could have just kept going down the canyon and not tried to fly out of it. Got a lot wider, about 10 miles east of where she tried to turn around. But she didn't. That's one of the things we need to talk about. Anyway, Luke has got a remote mic. If you have questions that don't get addressed up here, just raise your hand. He'll bring you the mic. It's like a little button. Just talk to it like you were talking to a microphone, but then give it back to him when you're done. Okay. So, first thing, pilot experience. One of the things that, there's several that these accidents we'll cover today where the pilot, to me, seemed minimally experienced. And I guess my first question would be, how much time do you think somebody should have in a make and model before they take passengers out? Any thoughts on that?
You know,
Just take it off and pass it back and forth. Nope, leave it alone, should be good.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So I think, I wonder, you know, she had just gotten checked out in this airplane, and I wonder what the responsibility is for the people that checked her out, because this is probably unfamiliar area for her, for them to, you know, just go beyond just the checkout, you know, can she take off and land safely? Excuse me. And, you know, what kind of flying have you done in the past? And, you know, can we get you a little more familiar with this area and the mountains? The other thing that happens, or at least should happen, if you're in an unfamiliar area, you want to talk to some of the local people and find out, you know, we have this great technology now called Google Earth. So you can actually, just like Rocky pulled up the picture of, you know, the profile of the mountain, you know, the lake that she, or the river or lake that she was on. And you can actually do it, you know, in the comfort of your house and see what the terrain is going to be like. So, but I think that the flight school or whatever, you know, had a little bit of a greater responsibility that they didn't take on to kind of help her get prepared for that particular flight. Obviously, she wasn't prepared at all.
Anything else?
Anybody want to add to that?
I think they should have required some mountain flying training, if they're gonna check people out in that area.
Hold the mic closer.
Hold the mic closer.
I didn't miss it. Was she from that area or?
No, yes, okay, and that wasn't, I did not address that. She received most of her flight training in Tennessee. Okay. They were on a family vacation, but, you know, it's hilly in Tennessee too in places, so I don't disagree with that at all on that. But I guess the fundamental question was, for those of us that may be mentoring younger pilots, I don't see many younger pilots out there. I don't care who she talked to ahead of time. She only had 2 hours in that airplane. I say, baloney. You got no business taking your loved ones up in an airplane that you can barely, you know. So what have you passed your checkout?
Yeah, it's not a lot of time.
Yeah, so my experience has been a little bit similar. My initial training was a Diamond 20, 172, and then I co-owned a 182 later year model than this one. But the thing that struck me is not only limited experience in type, which is not terrible. 172 to 182 is not a hard transition. But she did a checkout that morning with a CFI who did not weigh as much as 3 people. And so her experience with performance was solely with, okay, maybe the CFI was beefy, I have no idea. But, you know, not all CFIs look like Rocky. But nevertheless, if you have 3 people, I've only flown once at max gross weight in the 182, I had family up. And, you know, I made sure I had very low fuel because I had years of experience already and knew that what performance would be at that point. So that's the piece that struck me most, was the conditions were afternoon, not morning, in a place that gets hot, high altitude, much higher weight. So all the things were stacked against, and it doesn't seem to have been taken into account.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any of that. So, what advice would you offer, now this is in general, not just a new pilot, any pilot. When you're flying in a unfamiliar terrain, you know, that gives you limited horizontal maneuvering room, you know, what kind of altitudes, do you want to fly along one side, do you want to fly down the middle, you know, what are your thoughts?
I'd say, yeah, definitely being at a high enough altitude to probably maybe see the tops, or just, you know, don't get down in the bottoms, because these things can narrow down real quick.
Yeah, so even though the view's not as exciting from the sort of the lip of the canyon, it's pretty good anyway, and that way you're not stuck inside.
And also, if you're going somewhere where you've never been, maybe ask people that in the area get familiar with it. Like I said, we got Google Earth and stuff, which at Russ we use it constantly for a lot of stuff. But yeah, getting it where we're constantly asking each other, hey, have you ever been here, and that kind of thing. So getting local knowledge from people, that's definitely. And then give yourself plenty of altitude. And, be very conservative about how far down those things are going to get.
Yeah. Can everybody hear in the back? You guys can all hear, okay?
Just gonna say, so, like in the mountains,
Hold it up to your mouth.
okay, sorry about that. In the Kenai Mountains, where I've done most of my flying in Alaska, there's times when I've taken hunters up that want to find goats and sheep, and I go over the top of the mountain and come down the valley. I don't try climbing up the valley. Most people can't outclimb the terrain.
So, I guess in my case, it depends, you know, how much wind is there, so that's a factor, especially because the wind spills over. It's kind of think of a waterfall, and the wind spills over the mountain. So, you know, obviously you'd like to fly up on one side, preferably the right side, and then you can make your turn. It's a lot easier to see out the airplane, and everything goes better if you turn left. But, you know, it depends on where the wind is coming from and the upslope and the downslope. Thinking about that. So, who knows? How do you know if you're gonna make it over the top of a hill in front of you? Anybody help me with the answer? Good.
You gotta see the terrain rising.
Exactly. Well, you want to be able to see more on the other side. If you see less and less on the other side, you're probably not going to make it. And then, of course, beyond that, you want to just go straight into, you know, would I be going straight into the mountain, or would I want to, if I'm going to try to get over to the other side, what's the best way to cross?
45.
45, exactly. So, and again, the wind, you know, if you've got a 35 knot headwind, you're going to expect that you're going to have a rate of descent before you cross. Did you have another? Oh, you didn't answer, okay. But so yeah, so you want to take the wind into consideration.
I have only one thing to add. I have a very low risk tolerance, as do many in the academic fields. We tend not to be very exciting. My favorite tool for this that's rather good these days is to use a flight sim. Go fly the same route in this terrain, because the terrain maps and those things these days, while not perfect by any means, are rather good, and the views are taken from satellite imagery, the same as looking at Google Earth. And so, while I wouldn't base all my safety on it, it does give you a chance to see what things look like, what to expect going around. Not as great in a canyon, because the resolution is not quite there. But there's a similar accident that occurred, I don't know how many years ago. I saw a safety video recently in New York. Someone going down the river route made a turn, hit a building. That's the same as a canyon, right? You got tall buildings on either side, and that can be flown very, very practically. So you get a lot of information by test flying when if you don't make it, you gotta get up, have another cup of coffee.
Just push reset.
Yeah, good point. One of the things, another thing about this accident, they didn't have any survival gear with them, no communication devices. The only reason that any of them lived is they crashed close to a road and a hunter saw the whole thing happen and he immediately got on his phone, you know, and got some, I think it was a fire department response that actually got there first. And they worked their way down the ridge and got the survivors. But what do we have to say about flying in remote areas without communication devices?
Well, I think one of the things, you know, this thing burned pretty much right away, so, you know, what you have on your person is what you sometimes just walk away with, you know, trying to get out of the, you know, away from the flames. So how many people fly with a personal locator beacon? Yeah, that's a good number of hands. So yeah, and they, you know, you should dress for, it's interesting because most of us wear nylon, you know, some sort of nylon or synthetic fabric, so in a fire, those things don't do well at all. And yeah, it's something to think about, you know, when you're flying along, especially if you, nobody knows when they're gonna crash or if they're gonna crash, right? So you just need to fly along thinking about, you know, what ifs. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think that the way I learned it in the Air Force was dress for egress. Doesn't matter if it's the middle of the summer, if you're flying over a mountain range, you know, that goes up to 12,000 feet, you might be unhappy if you have to eject. Okay. So density, altitude, Mark brought that up. We'll go back and forth. Let me advance the slide. That's the turn radius one. Let's go here. So in addition to just running out of turning room, you know, you run out of power. In fact, you lose about 3% of your power for every 1,000 feet. So her density altitude was around 10,000 feet. So she was more power limited, plus being probably close to max gross. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, another thing I wanted to talk about was turn radius. So Ed and I had gotten a little discussion about this the other day. So Ed, why don't you say what your preferred mode is here?
So, okay, my take on all this stuff is that if you're starting to get nervous about what's ahead of you, I would start slowing down. And then I put some flaps down, not too much, but just the right amount. And I get to a comfortable speed. Let's say in a Cessna 180, it might be 20 degrees of flaps because you have the most lift, no drag, you know, less drag, as opposed to more than 20. And then, you know, you're flying at 80 miles an hour, 80 knots or whatever, 70 knots. So you've already started to think about the next two things, right? And which would be, okay, I want to turn around somewhere, but now I'm slow. You can pretty much turn on a dime, really, which is something I should say. The next time you get a chance to go up and practice, or maybe you're taking a flight review or something, practice turning around, you know, get over a road, safe altitude obviously, but get over a road or some place where you can kind of define the limits of confinement, right? And see how much it takes to turn around. You'd be surprised. In my case, you know, I believe the slower you are, to a point, obviously, that you can turn around in a much shorter diameter. But keep in mind, when you're in the mountains, it's a lot different because you're in a three-dimensional world. And so you don't have a horizon to, you know, you're basically really relying on your artificial horizon or the pressure you feel on the yoke, so when you turn around. So it's pretty important to understand that you really don't have a horizon to help you with that.
Yeah. Also, when you're looking at sheer cliffs or something close to that, your depth perception judgment of how far is it to that rock, it's like the bigger the rock wall, the closer you seem, even though you might not be. So it's hard, you do have to practice it. Let me explain this slide a little bit, because this comes right out of the airplane flying handbook and the handbook of aeronautical knowledge at all. Can you see this equation up here? That is the equation for your turn radius in feet. V is your velocity in knots to airspeed, and that's your bank angle right there, okay? I don't expect anybody to use this in flight, but I just want to point something out. Assume you have a wings level stall speed of 60 knots true, and by the way, that is knots true airspeed, not indicated. When you're at a higher altitude, what's the difference between indicated and true? True's a lot higher, right? And the warmer it is, the higher it is. Anyway, if you're, let's say you delay your decision. You've delayed your decision, and now you've only got 65 knots, right? And you use a 15-degree bank angle. That's going to increase your load factor just a tiny bit. Your stall speed now, though, has dropped 3 knots. It's gone down to 62, okay? You got a 3-knot margin above the stall. Can you afford to use a 15-degree bank angle? My guess is if you're starting to pucker, you're not going to limit it to 15 degrees. You're probably going to be steeper. But anyway, that's a 1,400-foot turn radius, means 2,800 feet to turn a 180, right? Two radii. Okay. Oh, what if you decide to use a 30-degree bank? Now your load factor increases a little more. Your stall speed goes to 65. Oops, there is no margin. You're at the stall. Even though it's only a 30-degree bank turn, you're at the stall. Well, what other way can you do it? Well, we could go faster and use a steeper bank angle. So let's say we were at 75 and we use a 40-degree bank angle. Our load factor goes up even more, of course. But our stall speed 69, and we're still 6 knots above the stall. Look at the turn radius, 595 feet versus 650 feet here. That's not a bad compromise. And the big thing is you're 6 knots above the stall. If you go 90 miles an hour, now you're making your decision early, right? You haven't let off all your airspeed yet. And you go, I want to turn around, and you're confined. You use a 45-degree bank angle. Your stall speed is increased to 71, but you got 19 knots above this, you know, you're not even close to stalling. And your turn radius is 719 feet. Just something, I'm not advocating anything here, but just keep in mind that there's more than one way to make a turn. And if you make a timely decision, then you don't have to do anything heroic and, you know, maybe lower flaps and your power limited and you start. So anyway, just something to think about. Let's go back. I think we've talked this one through. Questions from the audience? Okay, we've got, first one's over here.
I have a comment. This woman sort of had a list of things that are going wrong. Okay, so she's got 90% of her time in a much lighter airplane, half fuel, and alone. So when she's looking at this flight, I mean, she should have been thinking, well, that's a black mark. Never been in this airplane.
Risk management.
Well, yeah, and I don't think she did risk management. She shouldn't have even been down there with her
She was
level of
happy, she was
experience.
happy. It was, by the way, not a single accident we talked, I'm sorry, there's one accident we're gonna talk about where weather was a factor. Every other accident we talk about today, Bluebird Day, no issues. So you're absolutely right. Where was the risk management? We're gonna talk about that
There was no risk
in
management.
more detail later. But, and we had another question over here. Mike is coming.
Just while he's getting the mic over there, one of the things that occurred to me as Rocky's going through this is how many of us have had this kind of demonstration during any sort of training? We do things like steep turns because they're required by the FAA. How many of us routinely try a canyon turn? And you know, my guess is here in this room, probably a lot more than people more generally, but training ought to include doing this, actually trying these kinds of things out, not in a canyon. Someplace else where we can do that.
Okay, this is Mike Skoda. That's a great segue to my question because we got lots of flight instructor experience. So, you know, you get taught the chandelle for a canyon move. I've been flying 53 years, and, you know, my commercial ratings, 9,000 hours, flown the mountain of Denali for 47 years. I've never done a chandelle in a canyon, you know, and I think some of this discussion here of how to make a small radius turn is more practical, because you get in a panic situation, you ain't gonna dredge that up, well, what's a chandelle, I'm gonna dive and turn. So I think the flight instruction time for mountain flying ought to just bag that whole thing and put some of this good advice that we're
Well,
hearing
Darlene
today.
knows all about mountain flying instruction, so I'm sure she probably emphasizes a lot of this stuff. Ooh, there's another question, I think.
No, I was maybe gonna take the opposite side of that is, because way back when I did my commercial, they make, I don't know if they still make you do a chandelle, but it is something, and maybe the important thing is we take a check ride, and how often then after that do we ever practice anything? We just go flying, right? And we think we can handle all that stuff because we did it once.
I do it all the time because I'm bored. But,
Scare the passengers.
yeah,
The steep turns are fun.
I fly alone most of the time anyway, but,
Hey, Rocky?
Yeah.
I wanna hear what Darlene has to say.
yeah, I do.
When you teach, Darlene, when you teach in your mountain flying, what do you teach for turns? What would you?
Just what we've been talking about, and if you haven't flown in the mountains and you want to do the mountain flying, you should go with an experienced instructor, and you need to be comfortable flying close to the side of the valley. So you do not want to fly down the center, and everybody
Concur.
wants to when they're not prepared. You gotta fly along the side, get familiar with it, get comfortable with that. If you start getting a downdraft, turn away from the mountain and go the other side. But if you're flying close to the side, then if you need to turn around, if it's that tight, you need to slow down and bring in some flaps and make the turn. You will not use as much space as you're going to.
I mean, let's face it, 300 hours is not much
No,
experience
no, that's,
at all.
there's, I'm pretty sure, but it didn't really come out in the investigation because it's real short. Since they were able to talk to her and get a statement and everything, I think the NTSB's interest was fulfilling their obligation and not beyond. But my guess is she probably went through a university training program back in Tennessee. You know, she banged through all of her certificates and ratings, and she was out having a great time in Colorado.
Hey, Rocky, can I just say, add one thing? It's not too early in the program to talk about, so the FAA had something called Circle of Safety several years ago, some of you might remember it. But it empowers other people in the airplane to help with those decisions, you know. The other three people, I wonder how long, I mean, they must have, some of them must have known what was going on, you know.
None of them were pilots.
Right, but still, you know, you get uncomfortable and,
Yeah, but that might happen on takeoff.
It kind of, you know, as a pilot, and I will say that there are times, my threshold of comfort is much different than my passengers. So I will sometimes tell people, especially in turbulence or whatever, and even commercially, I'll say, you know what, if you guys get uncomfortable, let me know, and we'll turn around and do something different. Because I want them to feel that they're empowered to do that, and I think that's important.
I agree.
Oh, here we go. Your passengers will never tell you to be more safe. I've had 2 CFIs in the back seat and a private pilot, and I was flying into solid gray going to Lake Park, and I was saying, oh, you know, the real experienced guys, they'll tell me when to turn around. And they'll tell me, no, they wouldn't. They were gonna let me kill them. And I'm still here, so I didn't kill them. But they will. Your passengers, and I think even the pilots even will shut up for the ego. They don't want to, you know, walk on your ego.
Wait till you see our next accident review. Funny you should mention that. Yes, sir.
One other thing about the slowing down, I picked it up, I think, AOPA, one of these Schweig magazines somewhere. But drop full flaps in the turn, it's just amazing watching things wrap around. Read about it, practiced it, then I went and put it to work commercially. Someone wanted to see something that's hard to see, and I didn't want to go drive down the valley. Like, it's standard if you're doing a valley, you fly down it. But it's pretty much like a modified chandelle. You just wait till you're wide arc, dump full flaps, roll it around, fly your airplane on the backside, stabilize, and then clean up after a turn. But really successful and mind-blowing about how much you get slowed down and turned around.
Right, and as long as you're making your decisions early enough, that's all.
This is all pre-planned.
If you've got yourself going to the ragged edge of a stall before you even start that turn, you got a problem. I don't care how you do it.
I will say, if you're gonna do something like that, practice first out in the open. Don't make it the first time that you're gonna do it in a canyon that you have to get out of.
Anything else on this one before we move on? Okay, Mike, would you put up the foggy landing